Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and happy Sunday, August 16th of 2026. Now, I love this day in the summer because August 16th is the day that my son and his wife made me a grandmother. So my adorable, lovely granddaughter Hazel, she is 15 today, and I love this girl and her brother. And if you are a grandparent, you know what a brilliant thing it is. So August 16th is one of my favorite days. Now, I have had a ton of journaling this week, as usual. Some weeks tend to be a little bit more than others. Some tend to go a little deeper, a little edgier. They make me think a little bit more. I seem to have had a lot of those kind of really deep messages that I just feel like not just come through me for my own benefit, my own soul's growth, all of that, but because I feel so blessed to have this platform where I can share, it has really made this experience of journaling much deeper for me, much richer for me. In fact, I journal very differently as a woman my age, probably for the last 20 years, and the last 6 in particular, as the world started shifting. My journaling really changed, because when I was first writing my diary and doing my journals when I was younger, they were very different. They were more about keeping track of events. And of course, the teenage uh, filling out a diary Jane was always, knowing I'd go back and read this and I wanted it to be perfect and look perfect and give me these warm, fuzzy memories and how grand life was and all my hopes and dreams and desires. I was never a person who wrote through my teenage angst about boys. And when I did fall in love as a young person, because I got my first marriage, I got married at 18. So I met him when I was 15. So I still kept it just so polished and beautiful, and those days have definitely changed, because even the journals that I do now, they're not meant for people to look through and posterity. And if someone's interested, great. If not, great. But they give me a chance for deep reflection. So what I really started thinking on this week was this saying: love can say no more. Because we always say, oh, life gives us lessons. And, you talk about the sweet and creamy thing about, oh, it's so great. We get these really tough lessons. They help us grow. They help us be better people. And I realized that as my life has gone on, and some of the deepest, hardest lessons I've had, it's when I learned to say no more. It's when to say, I'm done, but love can say that too. And it's something I actually think about, and I've thought about these last few years especially, because I think it's really important to not betray ourselves all in the name of enduring to the end and love. Okay, because love can still say, I'm done, no more. That love can still do that. So I wanted to share I wrote down some questions. I let these just drop in, and then I sat with each one after it dropped in, and then journaled on it. Because I think that there might be people who listen to this that can relate with me completely, because I think we are in a time where it's not about self-sacrifice, okay? And I'm not going to give any specifics about what I'm talking about. There's some things that are fairly fresh and fairly, but I believe it can help. I believe some of these questions are going to help people, because I had a really amazing week, and it ended. Yesterday was Saturday. It was the funeral of my friend's 27-year-old who was killed in a plane crash on August 1st. And all of these things they're amazing to contemplate, and they're wrenching. Some of these things are just wrenching. So here's the very first question I wrote. Okay, if my soul chose this experience for my highest growth, because we always hear that, right? What is it that is inviting me to remember about who I really am? I think that is the biggest thing that I really seem to weave into all of these is remember. We have to remember who I am, who we are. I want to remember who I am to the depth of my core. And it might differ from someone else remembering them. They might have a different belief system that carries them to another lifetime after that. You know, this to me is whatever the lessons are that I'm supposed to learn, and I can stay in a place of love. I don't have to self-sabotage. So what are they inviting me to remember about who I am? So I sat there with that for a second, and then here's what I wrote. I believe that some of the experiences are lessons while I'm living them, okay? And sometimes they don't feel like lessons because they are so brutal. They just feel brutal. That's what they feel, brutal. So this is what they disrupt for me. When I am in the middle of a lesson that feels so brutal, it disrupts my peace, my security, my relationships, my finances, and my sense of what I thought was solid. And I talk about that a lot because I am a Taurus. I want certainty and safety. I want my foundation. Okay, I can go out and have fun and be spontaneous, but my foundation has to be solid. And when some of these brutal lessons come in, it disrupts all of these things. At least it has for me in my experience, okay? And what this happens is it brings me face to face with parts of my life that I never imagined I would have to navigate. I never thought I would have to navigate some of the things that I have navigated, okay? And if you can relate, I am sure you have had experiences like that too, because we're humans going through this crazy life, right? So what I found out is these are the ones that have shown me most clearly who I am. Okay. I didn't handle every one of them perfectly. In fact, I don't think any of us do. I don't think there's a perfect way to handle these. Okay. But somewhere along the way, and underneath all these things, fear, anger, exhaustion, and uncertainty, that there was a part of me that still knew this. This is not bigger than me. Okay. So you might have expected me to say, oh, this is all bigger than me. No. What I have come to realize is all of these lessons, all of these things that I'm learning and growing from and saying, love can say no more. I am bigger than that. And this is not coming from an egotistical or an I'm better than whatever. This is coming from a knowing that I am bigger than all of this stuff. Okay? Not the human me. That's what I wrote. Not the human me, the deeper me, the me that makes me, the divine spark of pure consciousness, that the soul, what I know, I am, right? Without the name, without the identity, without any of the titles that we give ourselves, the deeper part of me, okay? And this is what I want to remember the next time life gives me something that I never saw coming. I want to remember that. This is not bigger than me. I've got this. Look at the things I've handled before. Some of the things that I have handled, I never dreamed, first of all, that they would come on. And I always thought I could change things, right? And I think that can be okay. So here's the next question. Where am I resisting a lesson because my personality wants comfort more than my soul wants expansion? Okay, so I wrote that because I've stopped resisting the lessons. They actually come in quicker. And especially when you do the really, really hard ones that you never expected you to have to do, the other lessons they seem like a piece of cake. They seem like an easy, okay? So here's what I wrote, because what I really want to impart is how I've walked through some of these things and how they've helped my soul expand instead of just trying for comfort. Some you don't have a choice. You either have to expand or you shrivel up into victimhood and maybe you don't make it in whatever that looks like, right? So here's what I wrote. This question feels different than what the lesson actually cost me. Okay, so this question feels different because you're looking at the expansion of your soul, right? So it's easy to talk about growth when the lesson is inconvenient. Okay, so think about that. It's really easy to talk about growth when the lesson's inconvenient. All right? But it's another thing when it affects all of these things, your security, your future, your relationships, your livelihood, and something that you spent years building. It's very, very different than something that just feels inconvenient. Okay? When your whole world gets rocked And I know many people, you take any situation and you insert it there. Okay. Okay. I've had lessons I would never volunteer to repeat. Ever. I would never volunteer. I would never volunteer for it in the first place. Okay. Ever. I wrote ever and I underlined ever, ever, ever. Okay. But when I've walked out the other side, here's what everyone says this, but I realized that what I know, I would not give any of it back because of what I know now, because of them. I wouldn't give any of them back. And once you've walked through the fire, survived the fire, become resilient because of you walking through the fire, why would you give it back? You've just burnished yourself into bronze or gold or platinum or whatever. Why would you want to give that back, right? Would you want to walk through it again? Probably not. Maybe you walk through more really hard things that have equal intensity. I know I have, right? Okay, so I think it's an interesting contradiction. So I can absolutely, here's what I wrote. I can absolutely hate that I had to walk through and still be grateful for who walked out the other side of it. Both these things can be true. Okay, so here's the next question. What story am I still telling that keeps me believing I'm separate from love? Okay, this one took a while for me to come around to because I'm all about love and higher consciousness and unconditional love. In fact, I went through a point where sometimes when I was hiking over the years, as I was carrying my phone and taking pictures, I had this thing where I was like, I want to make t-shirts that say, love is love, love wins, love is whatever. And opened up a notes section of my phone and I started writing all these names all these titles and these sayings about love that I wanted to put on t-shirts. Because I just thought, well, and over the years, the list has grown. I actually ran across it the other day because I was just looking through some of my notes that I've saved on my phone. And most of the time I'll write something important down, but I won't come back to it. And if I'm just kind of thinking, oh, I need to disconnect my mind, I'll look through some of my notes instead of opening up social media, right? So that's what I found. So what story am I still telling that keeps me believing I'm separate from love? Okay, so here's the very first thing that I wrote about that. I think one of the stories that I've carried is that if I stay in love, everything will eventually work out. Okay, I have told myself that ad nauseum over and over and over again. Just stay in love. Everything will work out. Just stay in love. Just throw more love at it. Just be in love, right? Just be love. Okay, I now question that. That's what I wrote. Okay, I question everything about that. Okay, because sometimes it can mean staying. Sometimes love means staying. Sometimes love means leaving. This is where you have the opposites, right? Sometimes love is incredibly tender. And sometimes love has an effing backbone. Sometimes it's tender and sometimes it has a backbone. We all know, we've all heard the word tough love, all of us. Do we know how to apply it when the situation needs it? Maybe not. This is something I understand differently now. Loving doesn't require me to abandon myself. You know, this one is a powerful thing to let drop into the very depth of who you are. Love doesn't require me to abandon myself or endless patience with something. You know, unless you're talking about a child and you're raising a child, yeah, endless patience is important. It's a very important, but I'm not going to abandon myself. Now I might when when I was mothering, yeah, that was very different. So I'm talking about as an adult, we abandon ourselves. And I will say this, I know it's not just women. I do believe it is more women than men, but I have a couple of very dear friends who are men who fit in the category of possibly, well, not possibly, I know this for a fact because we're dear friends, that they have abandoned themselves because they feel like that's what love requires. Okay. And some of these things might be kind of harsh to hear, and maybe you disagree with me completely. In fact, I would love to hear what you think about that. You know, do you disagree with that completely? Personally, I don't think so. So I don't think it really requires endless patience that is actually harming me. You know, wow. I'm just going to leave that part there. It doesn't mean making myself smaller so someone else can remain comfortable. I have done that over and over and over. And then I wrote this: I can remain in love and still make a very hard decision. And a lot of times you don't have a choice because the lesson, the growth, the situation, it's right there in front of your face. Okay? So I can stay in love and still make a very hard decision. Okay, that felt just like, okay, whoa. Awesome. Now here's the next question. If every person and experience in my life is playing a role in my awakening, okay, what gift is the hardest one trying to reveal? Okay, so I wrote that question and then I sat with that for a minute and I'm like, gift? Ugh. How is the lesson a gift? I know, and I got a little bit like eye rolling. I'm sitting there, half laying, half sitting on the couch with my journal open, and I'm like, so here's what so right after that, I wrote this. I almost want to change the word gift. Okay. Some lessons don't arrive looking like a gift. Okay. Sometimes the gift has lived for months or years, or even been buried alive, of something I would have never consciously asked for. Okay. So the hardest experiences have forced me to discover capacities in myself I didn't know were there. I found out these things. Here's what I found out. I found out what I could withstand. You know, I think all of us can relate to that. I found out just how much I can withstand, how strong I am, and how resilient I am. You know, that is always one of the biggest things of these gifts, right? I also found out what matters. I found out what matters. That's always something that drops in. And then this is one of the biggest ones that I feel is a gift. I have found what I am no longer willing to tolerate. Okay? And where I have given away too much of myself. Okay? I know that there's people who are going to relate to this. I've also realized this: peace isn't the absence of a fight or a battle. Okay? Peace is not the absence of the fighting. Okay? Peace is knowing exactly why, and I circled why 100 times, why I'm standing where I'm standing. That's what peace is. I know the why. Why am I here in this situation or outside of this thing? Why am I outside of this? When I know that, that's where peace lives. That's where peace is, right there. And it's breathtaking. That type of peace is breathtaking. Number 5. What part of me was waiting for the outside world to change before I allow myself to experience peace? Because when I finished this with peace, that last question, when I was writing about it, I thought, okay, what part of me was waiting for the outside world to change before I allow myself to experience peace? You know, you could still be waiting for that after you look at where the world is. You look at all the things that are still happening, all the things that are on the horizon in these massively exponentially changing times. Okay, are you still waiting for things to get peaceful, things to be more stable, or what's going to happen with the data centers and the currency and digital currency and the next whatever things they're going to throw at us? Are you still waiting for that to settle down and to know what's going to happen and where we're going to land to feel peace? You know, I've realized that's why I wrote this question. What part of me was or keeps waiting for the outside world to change before I allow myself to experience peace? Okay, that is massive. And here's what I wrote. Here's the first thing I wrote after that question. This is where the spiritual stuff feels very real for me. All of the spiritual stuff, all of this, whoa, real, right here. Okay. And there have been times, and even now, when the outside world is truly chaotic, right? Okay. And I don't think you can meditate it away. I don't think you can positive think it away. Okay. That's what I wrote. I think you can put love and light over it, but you can't love and light it away. You can't love and light it away and pretend that everything is fine. Okay. So I'm not talking about that kind of peace. Things have to be dealt with, and decisions have to be made. You have to take action. We all have to take action. Decisions have to be made. Action has to be taken. Okay? There are realities sitting right in front of us. Okay? And here's a lesson right here. The lesson is not about escaping these realities. That's what I realized. Because there's been moments I've never really tried to numb myself out with substance or I might have numbed myself out here and there with social media scrolling or, a little bit too much distraction and input. And I find, especially because I'm so aware of it, and I did a week of social media fast that I didn't really talk about because I was going to talk about it last week, but I forgot. It was very impactful for me. It was very impactful. And it actually changed up my desire to, pop on and see what's going on Instagram or, YouTube. Those are my two main. So the lesson wasn't about escaping the reality, okay? This is what I discovered it is. I realized I can deal with them without letting them determine, here's the important piece, the condition of my soul. Okay, I can deal with these things, but it doesn't get to determine the condition of my soul, right? Like, let that drop in for just a second, okay? And this, to me, is a very different kind of peace. That's what that is. Okay, now the next question that dropped in, and I almost didn't include this because I talk about it a lot, but I also think it's very important, and that is forgiveness, okay? Because I think we get caught in a type of forgiveness where we give away what brought this in, okay? Which is love can say no more, okay? So this one has turned out to be a very, very good one. So if forgiveness is really about setting my own soul free, what am I still choosing to carry? Okay, so that was a question that I wrote. I'm like, okay, here's this quote. Let's talk about forgiveness. Okay? And what is about setting my soul free in the forgiveness department, and what is about still choosing to carry what's not mine to carry? That is so massive. Okay, so here's what I wrote. Forgiveness gets talked about so beautifully, and I've done that a lot. Okay? Sometimes we forget how messy it actually is. Sometimes we forget. Forgiveness is messy sometimes, okay? It doesn't mean it's still not forgiveness, but a lot of times it's messy, right? When you're dealing with a person, a situation, people you care about, situations you care about, okay? Forgiveness can be messy, okay? I can forgive someone and still remember exactly what happened. This is the important piece. Is when you hear something like, I can forgive, but I don't have to forget. It's that, okay? I can forgive someone and still remember exactly what happened. It's as simple as that, right? I can forgive and change the relationship. It's as simple as that. Is it messy in between all that? Yeah. Okay. I can forgive and never allow the same thing to happen again. There's a line. This is where you say, love can say no more. Okay, that's where I'm so grateful that I left that forgiveness question instead of just taking it out, passing it over. I'm like, there's something else here. There's something else here. Okay. Then this one is massive. And it's at least very massive for me. I can forgive and still have consequences to deal with. Okay. And I also think this, okay? This is where it's like, whoa. I can even forgive someone and decide they no longer get access to me. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. Love asks no more. Love can say no more. Okay? And that's where this gets a little bit tough for some people. And if this lands, great. If this feels like, okay, Jane, you're a little off there, okay, great. That's great. This lands for me, okay? I can even forgive someone and decide they no longer get the same access to me. None of those things cancel forgiveness. They don't cancel it. Forgiveness doesn't mean you get to be someone's doormat. That's not that, okay? For me, forgiveness is becoming less about restoring everything to what it was and more about refusing to carry what we all like to say, poison forward. Not forgiving is like drinking poison and expect the other person to die. So it's more about refusing to carry the poison forward. I'm not going to carry this forward. That's forgiveness. Okay? I can put down any anger I feel without picking the situation back up. I can put all the anger down. And you know what that is? What I wrote here? That's freedom. And I love freedom on where it relates to anywhere. Okay? And then this question: where have I mistaken being loving for abandoning myself? So many times. So many times. Okay? And then I wrote this. As I sat there with it, I thought, okay, this is probably the edgiest question for me. That's what I wrote. This is the edgiest question for me, because I'm like, whoa. Because I have spent a lot of my years abandoning myself because I forgive so fully and so completely, but now I realize I don't have to do that. I can absolutely forgive completely and absolutely fully. I don't have to lose myself, okay? Okay, so this may be the edgiest question for me because I know how to love. That's what I wrote. I know how to love, and I know how to stay, and I know how to forgive. I know how to give another chance. Okay, who can relate to this? And another, and another, and another effing other. That's what I wrote. I know how to do all that. I'm damn good at it. Okay? So those are beautiful qualities until they're used against my own well-being, my own well-being. Those are beautiful qualities until they're used against my own well-being. Let that sink in for 1 second. Okay? There comes a point, I realized, where staying isn't necessarily the most loving choice. Whatever it is, a job that sucks your soul, right? Whatever this is, insert here. Okay? The lesson I realize is this: it isn't learning on how to open my heart more. I can keep my heart freaking open, even when I am in the depth of doing something that is so freaking hard. In fact, that is one of the things I love the most about myself, is that I can be in the middle of something super hard, super rough, and my heart is still open. And I think that's why some of these things hurt me so deeply, is because my heart's just like, woof, okay, just arrow just went there, but I know there's so much love out there. There's so much love, and this is something I don't want to ever change about myself. So sometimes my lesson isn't learning how to open my heart more, okay? Here's the lesson. This is so beautiful for me. Sometimes the lesson is realizing that my heart can remain completely open and I can finally say enough. That's it, right? I have a feeling this might trigger some stuff in people in a good way, because these feel like really beautiful truth bombs for me. And maybe this is sitting with you in an uncomfortable way or in a not good way. Maybe you didn't make it this far because you're like, hey, I don't like this. All is well, because all this is my perspective, right? This is all what I get from learning hard things and saying this to myself: love can say no more. Love can say that. Love can say, no, done. Okay? So fine. So sometimes the lesson is realizing my heart can remain completely open while I say finally enough. Okay? This distinction, this distinction has cost me something. Oh, this distinction has cost me something. And here's what I've learned: I will never forget it. When I make that distinction finally, it has taken me sometimes so long to make that distinction. But now I know I won't ever forget it. These things drop in and they become permanent, right? Okay, the next question. If every difficult moment is an opportunity to remember who I am, okay, that's kind of where we started. What does responding from love actually require of me? Okay, so it's a way to look at this a little bit differently, because it normally comes from a place of Like it's just self-sacrifice. So here's what I wrote about. Here's what I wrote for this question. Not what does love look like? Okay, so let me read the question again. If every difficult moment is an opportunity to remember who I am, what does responding from love actually require of me? So not what does it look like, okay? What does it require? And here's what I wrote about that. First of all, it requires courage, okay? Then it requires restraint. Then it requires really uncomfortable honesty. It requires action. Action is massive. You can't just sometimes you might turn into a ball of mush that can't do anything for a minute, that you have to regroup. You have to let your nervous system rebalance. You might turn into that for a minute, but it requires action, okay? Sometimes it requires saying nothing. That one is important because I like to talk and I like to share everything and I like to figure it out. I like to talk it out. Sometimes it requires saying nothing. That one is really important for me, okay? And sometimes it means protecting something that was entrusted to me and allowing another person to experience, this is big, the consequences of their own choices instead of me stepping in to make everything all right and just to soften everything up. Okay? Sometimes it requires, that's what it requires, and allowing another person to experience the consequences of their own choices instead of me always stepping in to soften the blow, right? Oh, wow. That's so big for me. Love isn't always nice or agreeable, and love certainly always isn't easy. I think that's probably the biggest thing that lessons teach you is that love doesn't have to always look so pretty and have these high expectations of, oh, love is butterflies and roses and everything looking perfect and everyone feels lovely. Love doesn't look like that. We all know that, right? Okay, so I think that one of the greatest challenges of consciousness, okay, this is for me, is learning to distinguish love from fear when both can disguise themselves as this. Because for this is my thing, kindness. I needed to be able to distinguish, is this love or fear? Because they both can put on that costume and disguise themselves as kindness. That's been my experience. Okay, the next question. What identity have I outgrown that my soul is asking me to release? This one I have been asked over and over and over again, especially in the last 6 years. What part of my identity have I outgrown that my soul is asking me to release? You know, because sometimes holding up these identities and these egos is freaking tiring. It's just tiring. And who's really paying attention to this thing you're propping up? Except for you. There might be other people too. And there might be other people who've unnecessarily taken advantage of you because you're propping up this identity just for what, right? So here's what I wrote. Sometimes I believe it's someone, well, let's see. The identity I've outgrown that my soul has asked me to release. Someone who believes I can carry everything. Yeah, I didn't write a very clear answer there. So I'm being asked to release that as someone who believes I can carry everything. Oh, you got this big old hard thing? Okay, you want me to do it? Okay, throw it on me. Oh, and I'm carrying that, but you got this other great big hard thing? Oh, okay, throw it on. Okay, oh my gosh, look how strong I am. I've been doing that my whole life. And I'm grateful for a lot of this, most of the stuff I can carry. It's so awesome. I love that piece of me, right? I don't have to do that. Like there's things that I've actually gotten pretty good at this the last couple years, especially. Okay. And then this, someone who thinks that strength means enduring indefinitely. Okay. And then I come by this honestly. So think about this. Someone who thinks that strength means that I have to endure indefinitely. That makes me strong. And I come by that, and I wrote down here my childhood religion. One of the things that was always said was endure to the end, endure to the end. So you're enduring indefinitely because time is indefinite. You're enduring. And that just sounds like suffering to me. Suffering. So then it's also this someone who assumes that because I can handle everything, I should handle everything. I'm not going to keep doing that person. Okay. That's a big one, right? That's what I wrote. That's a big one, right? I realize this. I'm incredibly resilient. And life has proven that to me over and over and over as I've walked through it. Okay. But here's what I realize. If I'm going to be strong and resilient, it doesn't mean that I volunteer for more unnecessary suffering. Why do we do that? That's a good question to ask yourself. I don't need another difficult experience to prove how strong I am. I already know. I'm strong. Great. Yay. Oh, throw another difficult experience so I can prove it again. No. I know I'm not done with difficult experiences. I know that. But I'm not just going to ask for them or volunteer for them. That is the word. Why would you volunteer just to prove how strong you are? Oh, this question and this little thing came in because I had a really good conversation with a dear friend of mine who's a fellow business owner here in Salt Lake where I live. And we talked about the unnecessary suffering that we volunteer for. We're very like attract like, so we're very dear friends. He's got business things that he deals with that are brutal, and some of them he simply takes them on. He volunteers for them. It's just so fascinating. So here's where I landed at the end of this question. I realize I'm much more interested in this. What can I create now from the strength that I have? And I've been in creation mode for a long time, and I really love that piece of me. Let's see, what do I have? 37 minutes. Okay, I hope you're still here. I hope this is interesting. Maybe you watch or listen to things on videos at a faster speed. I sometimes if I tune into my own self to see how a certain thing sounds, or I'll a few months down the road, I'll look back and I'll go, I wonder how that one's holding up. I listen to myself at faster speed and that's just how my brain works. But okay, so here's the last question that I thought I was writing because I ended up with a bonus question that came out after I sat there for a minute. But here's the second to the last question. If I completely trust that nothing in my life has been wasted, what do I do with the lessons I never wanted? Okay, that's a big question, guys, right? What do I do with those lessons? I never asked for those. I never wanted those. I think 100% of us can say that. I didn't want that lesson. Well, it came and you lived through it. You either grew from it or you became a victim because of it. You're on one side or the other of that. So here's what I wrote about. Here's my answer to that. I use them. Period. I use them. Right? Okay, so that answer didn't come to me right away. That was like, okay, that took me a minute to actually sit with that. And here's an important piece of that. I don't romanticize it. I don't like to romanticize the hard things. In fact, I overthink them into harder than they probably were. I don't know if you do that, but I've done that. I don't pretend I'm grateful for every painful detail. That's been something that I've actually been pretty good at. In fact, sometimes I've been kind of pissed at it. Like, I'm not grateful for that. Like, really? I have to learn that through that, like that way? Okay, so I don't try to rewrite. Now, I have tried to rethink some things and think I could think them into a different outcome. Okay, so I realize I don't have to rewrite the past and call everything just perfect and beautiful because I survived it. I don't have to do that, okay? But here's the thing, I can use what it taught me. So I can use them. I can use these lessons. I can use what it taught me to do this. I can become more discerning. Discernment has been one of my favorite words for a long time, okay? I can learn that it is harder to manipulate me, but it's still easier to love. I can still keep my heart open. It's easier to love. I can pay attention sooner. I can pay attention to the signs, my little intuitive hits that I get. Okay, I can pay attention sooner because some of these things snowball into problems and issues and painful life lessons that I never needed to learn because I didn't listen to my intuition. So I can pay attention sooner. I really like that one. I can trust myself faster. That's a really good part of the intuition. And then I can protect what matters. And I've always actually done that. I can protect things that matter. And that is just a part of the personality I was born with in this lifetime is that. And then I can stop confusing endurance with virtue. That one is so important for me. Okay. So let's see. Some of this stuff is just a bunch of scribbles. So then I wrote this because I wrote just a bunch of scribbles. One more question. So there's another question that dropped in. So underneath all of these things, I don't think I could have asked myself until I've lived through some really hard things. And then this final question, can I remain rooted in love without using love as a reason to abandon myself? Okay, so this is the final question I'm going to leave this video with, and I want to tell you how I answered it with just a couple of reflections, okay? Because this to me is the important part of saying love can say no more, okay? So can I remain rooted in love without using love as a reason to abandon myself? I really would consider sitting with this question with yourself and a blank open page, okay? Because if you get quiet enough for long enough and you sit and you let your higher self answer this, I think some really powerful things will drop in for you, because I know this is something that I have caught myself over and over and over again. It was almost so automatic. I didn't realize for most of my life that I was doing it. I didn't realize. Okay, so here's what I wrote. This is where it gets real for me. Okay, because love is what we are. I underlined that several times because I know that. And I talk about it all the time because I know that. Love is what we are. It's our natural state. Okay, but living from love doesn't mean becoming passive while we're in this human experience. That's not what love means. Okay? We still have choices to make. We still have boundaries. We still have responsibilities. And we still have moments, this is where you got to think about this, where something has to change. We still have moments where something has to change, right? Okay? It becomes a study of opposites. That's what I realized. If you're going to just stay in this place of love, okay? Love can be, I can be these things. I can be loving and I can be fierce. And you can probably relate to that. I can forgive, but I can remember, okay? I can surrender, but I can take action. Like, think about that. You become a study of opposites. Okay, I can trust my soul and still handle the very human reality that's sitting in front of me. Okay, I can trust my soul. I can still handle it. I can still handle that reality. Okay, I can love someone and say no. I can love someone and let them go. I can love myself enough to stop participating in something that is asking me to betray what I know. That makes me want to cry, because that one is so big. That one is so big. I can love myself enough to know to stop participating in something that is asking me to betray what I know. That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful for me. None of those things move me away from love. None of these things, these opposites, they don't move me away from love. That's the beautiful realization, right? If I do it consciously, they bring me closer to it. So if I do these things consciously, they bring me closer to love, to a deeper, more congruent, more beautiful love. Because there's boundaries. There's now boundaries, okay? Perhaps that's one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn, is this, and this is where I'm going to end it. Love has never asked me to disappear. It's asking me to show up fully. Fully. So I would love to know, first of all, did you get through this? 44 minutes. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. It's always interesting when I get to share these, and sometimes I need to be a little cryptic, because there are situations, there are relationships, there are things And my hope is that I can bring something that you can relate to that might change something in the way you walk through life. And in this particular video, this particular moment, when you realize love can say no more, it still is love. And actually, I think it's a higher love. I think it's a much higher, more congruent with your soul kind of love. So anyway, thanks for tuning in today, guys. I love you tons, and we'll see you next time.